Good morning, everyone. I'm the Reverend William Levwood. My pronouns are he and him. As we begin our service this morning, I invite you to close your other windows or apps, your other devices. I invite you to take a deep breath and center yourself for worship. We begin by calling forth and honoring the people who made each of us, our biological and spiritual ancestors, our teachers, and our guides. We call forth those who imagined and made this congregation possible, sustaining it up to today. We open in welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests on the unceded territory of the Manahoac tribe of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on in their descendants, the present day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomac Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing, so that all together shall one day know full justice.
We welcome you to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church live stream worship service. I'm happy to be your worship associate for today. Accotink UU Church is a welcoming and inclusive community that seeks to create a more just and compassionate world. All are welcome here in this justice-seeking, earth-healing community of faith. You're welcome no matter whom you love, no matter your identity or heritage, no matter your beliefs or background, no matter your means or abilities, you are welcome here in this religious community. On our website, www.accotinkuu.org, you can check the online order of service on the worship section. While you're on the website, be sure to check our events page for upcoming virtual gatherings and other news. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our virtual coffee hour immediately after this service. We're glad that you decided to join us today. Welcome. I'm going to read you a poem now, and it's from our National Poet Laureate, who is the first Native American to hold that post, Joy Harjo. We gather by the shore of all knowledge as peoples who were put here by a God who wanted relatives. This God was lonely for touch and imagined herself as a woman with children to suckle, to sing with, to continue the web of the terrifyingly beautiful cosmos of her womb. This God became a father who wished for others to walk beside him in the belly of creation. This God laughed and cried with us as a sister at the sweet tragedy of our predicament. Foolish humans. Or built a fire as a brother to keep us warm. This God who grew to love us became our lover, sharing tables of food enough for everyone in this whole world. O sun, moon, stars, our other relatives peering at us from the inside of a God's house, walk with us as we climb into the next century, naked, but for the stories we have of each other. Keep us from giving up in this land of nightmares, which is also the land of miracles. We sing our song, which we've been promised has no beginning or end. All acts of kindness are lights in the war for justice. We gather up these strands broken from the web of life. They shiver with our love as we call them the names of our relatives and carry them to our home, made of the four directions, and sing of the South, where we feasted and were given new clothes, of the West, where we gave up the best of us to the stars as food for the battle, of the North, where we cried because we were forsaken by our dreams, of the East, because return to us is the spirit of all that we love.
Hi, my name is Allie Mills, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'd like us to hold our attention on the poem that we just listened to by Joy Harjo. In it, she asks us to gather up the strands broken from the web of life and carry them to our home made in the four directions. These four directions that she references are north, south, east, and west, just like our guiding points, like the points on this compass. For our spiritual practice today, we'll be using some of the lines from the poem to focus our discussion during our coffee hour after service and share with each other our four guiding points or values after taking some time to reflect on the following questions. So as part of our creative and spiritual exploration, I'm going to share with you the questions and how they're going to align with the poem. So the first part of the poem says, of the South, where we feasted and were given new clothes. So one of our discussion questions today is going to be what nourishes or what feeds you? So it might be friendship or family, maybe working in the garden. So think about that, what nourishes and feeds you. The next line in the poem is of the West, where we gave up the best of us to the stars as food for the battle. So for this question, I want you to think about and consider what gifts have you received from your ancestors? Maybe it was passed down cultural traditions or resilience. So think about those things and how they might relate to how you are today as a person. The third one is of the North, where we cried because we were forsaken by our dreams. So this question is, what helps you overcome obstacles or make it through hard times? Maybe it might be yoga or meditation, listening to music. This today would be a great opportunity to share some of those things that have helped get you through, because this has been a pretty difficult last 2 years for all of us. So maybe share those ideas with each other during coffee hour today. So for this last line of the poem, it states, of the East, because return to us is the spirit of all that we love. So for this one, we want you to think about what is emerging in your life, what's new, what's going on. Maybe there's a new love, maybe you have something that you're really passionate about that you want to share, something that you're working on. So any of those things. So think about what's emerging in your life. So during our coffee hour, we're going to share and think about during service. Maybe we can post these questions in the coffee hour for you to reflect on as you listen to the rest of service and think about what are your guiding values.
Every time I watch that short film, The Message from the Future to the Years of Repair, it hits me a little differently. Sometimes it strikes me as naive, unrealistic, unreachable. Other times I'm inspired and really believe we can make that future a reality. In the continued uncertainty of the pandemic, as case numbers remain super high, but also are dropping quickly, as it's announced that a new Omicron variant is spreading, it's heartening to open up to the idea that the pandemic could be the seed, the beginning of a hopeful future. As the film puts it in its opening lines, Looking back, it's hard to believe we've rebuilt our community from the ground up with our own hands. The first seeds, the film says, the first seeds were planted in the terror and the tenderness of the pandemic. The terror and the tenderness of the pandemic. As the pandemic has worn on and on, as the death toll has risen beyond even the worst initial predictions, past 100,000 deaths in the United States, then past 200,000, then 3, 4, 500,000 deaths a year ago as Biden took office. As now we near 900,000 deaths in the US, as 1 million deaths looms on our horizon with already over 5 million deaths worldwide, it can be easy, tempting to only remember the terror, to lose sight of the tenderness. But there has been tenderness, so much tenderness. What a wonder that we human beings have developed schools to educate our young, coordinated farming and food transport to bring hunger to its lowest point in human history, that we have hospitals and clinics and nursing homes to care for the sick and the aging. None of this tenderness has to exist. It isn't a given. We've made it happen. We've shaped it with our own hands. And then there's the pandemic. And though it's been mixed, though many have refused to social distance, especially in the beginning when it would have made all the difference, when we could have flattened the curve. Remember when we thought we could flatten the curve in the beginning? We need also to remember all of the choices that have been made, that we and so many others have made with tenderness and care in mind. Millions have social distanced and masked, have been vaxxed and boosted, in many cases less to protect ourselves than to protect those most vulnerable. In the beginning, so many millions of us under 60 socially distancing and masking to protect those over 60. Later, social distancing and masking and getting vaccinated to protect children who couldn't yet be vaccinated. And through it all, we've taken special care to protect the immunocompromised of all ages. And then there's the tenderness of our everyday interactions, all the ways that I know this congregation has reached out to each other throughout the pandemic, offering support, staying connected, whether from a distance or when possible, in person. Pretty quickly, the film jumps ahead and starts talking about the last prisoners being released, starts talking about universal family care and green public housing. That part usually catches me off guard. It seems too easy, seems utopian, naive. But then the film returns us to the beginning of the pandemic, and we're shown a possible pathway to that hopeful future. We're reminded of the tenderness that we have shown each other through the pandemic. At one point, the film says, we finally understood that we couldn't keep patching up the same broken system. We had to build something new. I've been thinking a lot about this recently, about seeing with new eyes, about building something new with our hands. And I've been thinking too of the dismantling that's happening and that needs to happen. Tearing down of the old to make space so that we can see something new with our eyes, so that we can make something new with our hands. Adrienne Marie Brown wrote in a recent essay about the Confederate statues coming down. writing, quote, "Those statues seemed like they'd always been there and always would be." A sentence later, she writes, "Now it feels inevitable that we are pulling down the symbols, while inside everyone's minds, we're pulling down the ideas of racial supremacy." And she continues saying, "Then there's the gap, the statue's empty base, the place where that idea once seemed right, but now there's just the wound, the world shaped around the absence of a clear way of being." Her writing continues about the temptation to rush ahead, to put up new monuments. She asks, could we imagine just leaving the statue's empty base if for a while we could live in that space of possibility? What if we didn't rush to fill the emptiness, but waited to see what newness might arise if we're patient, open to change? Notice too what Adrienne Marie Brown says about the monuments, that they don't just exist in the concrete world, but also exist as shapes in our own minds. Have we really taken down the Confederate statues in our minds? In the collective mind of this nation? What is it that's so terrifying about dismantling old structures? Have we forgotten that we're the ones who built them in the first place? From our own visions with our own hands? Have we forgotten the schools, the hospitals? No wonder we're so afraid if we don't trust ourselves to remake the world, to envision a new kind of future, and to shape it with our hands. The monuments are there still in our minds, and they have been shaped also by our hands. And I do mean our hands. It's true that we inherited so much, the good and the bad. It's true that before we even knew what we were doing, we were shaping the monuments in our minds, following the model that had been given to us. Children as young as 2 and 3 years old already show evidence of racial bias. That's not because racial bias is an inevitable aspect of being human. It's because they're paying attention. It's because children's minds are so facile. It's because children are so amazing at learning, and they're learning the models we've given them and building those monuments in their minds. The monuments they see, mostly by observing our unspoken actions, that they see are present still in our minds. I've been engaging recently in a kind of a spiritual practice, an act of visualization. It's been inspired by the land acknowledgement that Reverend Pippin wrote, that I recite at the beginning of every service. So for this visualization exercise, I begin by stepping outside and looking around. And I try to imagine what was here before, in the past. What was there where that brick building is now? 100 or 200 or even 500 years ago? Forest, most likely. Perhaps a different kind of dwelling, different animals maybe, large game like deer. And then what happened? I tried to imagine it. People being removed from their land, maybe dying from disease or from violence, most likely the disease first and then the violence, and then a simpler kind of displacement of the few who remained. And then new kinds of dwellings going up, and likely deforestation to make way for farms. And then I imagine as those new settlements disappear too, over time. I live currently in Richmond, in a neighborhood that's in a slow process of gentrification. The house I live in was constructed this century after older houses were torn down, after the other families moved out. And then I try to imagine what this place I inhabit might look like in the future. What could it become, and how would that happen? I imagine a hopeful future. I imagine solar panels on the houses. I imagine that Black families stop getting pushed out, maybe even start returning to the neighborhood. The film talked about lands being given back to Indigenous Americans, and I must confess my imaginings never get that far. But the film inspires me to widen my horizons, to imagine what might have been unimaginable for me. So I'm trying to do this exercise on a regular basis, to keep coming back to it as a practice of imagination, imagining what has been, what is, and what could be. And visualizing, visioning how to shape a new land and a new community, a community like the one the film talks about, one that prioritizes people over profit, that centers care and repair as our most important values, the values that will shape our world. I was introduced to that film through my participation in the UU online anti-racist curriculum, Beloved Conversations. That curriculum also introduced me to the Initiative for Indigenous Futures, Illustrating the Future Imaginary Project, in which Indigenous artists were invited to illustrate their community's future 7 or 10 or 20 generations from now. I printed some of those out, and I've been making a practice to look at them regularly and reflect on them. There's a painting of a Maori warrior god, which reminds me of the fierceness, the ferociousness we need to counter injustice and oppressive structures. There's an Inuit village of the future with domed homes, solar panels on top, half underground. The dome continues because it isn't safe to be outside in this imagined future for too long. But also with huge cisterns for collecting rainwater, also with wind turbines that provide electricity for the community, and a communal greenhouse providing them food sovereignty. That one is my favorite. It's beautiful, it's sparse, it's peaceful. I don't know if that's what the future will look like, though. There are so many shapes our future could take. There are 2 of these pieces of artwork that I find most useful right now. The first is from a Mohawk artist, one of the nations in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Haudenosaunee means people of the longhouse, and this painting is of a longhouse, a lone longhouse surrounded by an industrial landscape of big buildings. The artist writes about how the illustration shows the dominant colonial world growing around us, with the Haudenosaunee longhouse holding colonialism at bay. And at the bottom of the painting are these words: perseverance. No matter what happens around us, we will maintain who we are. No matter what happens around us, we will maintain who we are. This vision of the future speaks to me right now as a Unitarian Universalist, inspires me. May we have the perseverance to maintain who we are, no matter what happens around us. May we preserve our values. May we continue to be a place for telling the truth, like UU Fairfax's initiative to develop a history curriculum. So that if the schools stop teaching the truth about history, we'll just go ahead and teach it in our congregations. Just like when the majority of schools in America stopped providing sex education. We, with our cousin Congregationalists, the United Church of Christ, we developed our whole lives, our comprehensive sexuality education program, to fill that gap, and centered it in the core values of respect, relationship, responsibility. The other illustration that speaks to me right now, even though it's of the future, shows multiple generations gathered together to care for each other. The artist, a Mohawk artist again, writing, "We can build a kind future for our children." We can build that future. We can work to embody it right now. In our UU congregations, we can develop a network of care and repair, where the different generations join together to raise up our children and youth. As we all care for each other, the old helping to care for the young helping to care for the old, we can embody a network of care and repair that will build the monuments of the future, which might not be monuments at all, except in our minds, in our communities of care and repair. As I mentioned at the beginning of this sermon, we've already begun to do this throughout the pandemic, weaving a stronger network of care right here in this congregation and in the community beyond this congregation. I want to remind us that the change is happening. The monuments are coming down in our cities and in our minds. The statue of Robert E. Lee that was central to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017 has now been taken down as of early last year. Rebecca Solnit reports that it will be melted down to be made into a new work of art under the direction of the Jefferson School African American Heritage Center in a project called Swords into Plowshares. This is exactly what we need to do with those old monuments, those old structures of injustice and oppression in our institutions, in our own minds, and in the collective mind of our nation. We need to melt them down and then use our hands, our tender, loving hands, to turn the swords into plowshares, the hate into love, the oppression into care and repair. I know it isn't going to be easy, but as Adrienne Marie Brown subtitled the first part of the essay I quoted earlier, what a time to be alive. What a time it is to be alive. So may we respond to the terror with tenderness, with fierce resolve, with the courage to envision new ways of being in community together, keeping the best of what's been developed by those who've come before us, tearing down their horrible mistakes, and building and nurturing the seeds of new ways of being together. Rooted in our whole lives' values of respect, relationship, responsibility, nurturing the values of care and repair as we build the world we dream about. May it be so, and may we be among those who make it so. Amen, 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 and blessed be.
But now we will extinguish our flame. And we carry within us what we kindled, the light of inspiration, the warmth of compassion, the fire of commitment. May we bring these gifts into our lives and share them radiantly out in the world. I wish we were holding hands as we used to a couple of years ago to say the words of David Bumbaugh. But I, in my own mind, will be holding all of your hands. This church is dedicated to the proposition that behind all our differences and beneath all our diversity, there is a unity that makes us one and binds us forever together in spite of time and death and the space between the stars. We pause now in silent witness to that unity.
And from that common shared humanity, may we envision a future, and may we bring our minds, our hearts, and our hands to shape a future of kindness, harmony, and justice, of care and repair, remembering that, as our nation's poet laureate Joy Harjo told us in the poem we shared early in the service, all acts of kindness are lights in the war for justice. May it be so. May we continue to be among those who make it so, step by step.